Greetings and welcome. Thank you for coming. I'm glad to have you here. I am the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this is The Deathworlders, Chapter 22, Warhorse, The Second Year, Part 2. Before we begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons down below and maybe dropping us a comment. It all helps feed the ever-hungry algorithm. Now, on with the story. Date point: 6 years, 10 months, 3 weeks, AV. Huntsville, Alabama, USA, Earth. Adam Aries. Gentlemen. The SOR perked up as their instructor arrived and claimed their immediate full attention. He was a wiry, tired-looking man who Adam immediately spotted had some kind of facial nerve palsy, or who had maybe suffered a stroke at some point. My name's Drew Cavendish, he introduced himself. I'm a co-founder of CNM Extravehicular Systems, a member of Hephaestus LLC, but right now I'm here as your extraterrestrial environmental instructor.
Mr. Cavendish here has more EVA experience than anybody else in the history of the human race,
Powell told them, shaking Cavendish's hand.
He's also responsible for designing our spacesuits. You will treat every word he has to say as gospel. Is that clear?
They were outside of a formal context, so he got a slightly asynchronous rumble of nevertheless clearly enunciated yes sirs. Satisfied that the lads were listening and switched on, he deferred to Cavendish again. Cavendish nodded and scribbled a note on the back of his own hand. Right. Welcome to 0G101, he said. That room through there is this facility's variable gravity training room, one of 3. A few things to know before we get started. First of all, I'm an easygoing type, but I've been training people in this field for a while now, and we're dealing with stuff that's essential to your safety and that of others. Out here in the corridor, I'm Drew. In there, he nodded towards the large doors with the lights over them. Keep it formal, attentive, and promptly obedient, please. I don't want to be deliberately putting you in harm's way, but equipment failure is always an option. Clear? The team nodded their understanding, and Cavendish checked his tablet computer. Right. Cavendish's rule number 1. Altered gravity is dangerous, he told them. Those rooms can be configured in ways that would kill or severely injure anyone who enters them at the wrong moment. That light above it is color-coded. If entering the room would pose an immediate danger to your health, it's red and the door will be locked. If it is somehow open while the light's red, do not enter. That light's never supposed to be off. If it is, assume that it's red and contact the controller immediately. Yellow means the safe zone around the floor is fine. The room's controller will need to admit you, and you must not leave the yellow demarcated zone without permission. Green means that the room is active, but that no part of it should pose a health risk. You must get the room operator's permission to enter, but you may move freely once permitted. Blue means that the room is not drawing power and you may enter freely, because it's exactly like it is out here in there. With me so far? There was another chorused confirmation. Yes, sir. Finally, under no circumstances, not even if the light is blue, may you enter that room without one of those helmets. Cavendish indicated the rack by the door. Find one that fits and put it on now. The team stepped smartly to obey, and all soon had found one that fit. Right. As you can see, the light is yellow. That means, don't leave the yellow zone without permission. Good. As that room's operator, I'm now granting you permission to enter. He filed in behind them. The room was a cube about 100 yards to his side. The yellow zone occupied only about the first 10, followed by a green zone, a blue zone, and the rest of the floor was black. Sitting just inside the black zone, somebody had set up 12 kettlebells. There were some murmurs of surprise and interest as the men crossed the threshold, and Cavendish smiled. Earth's standard gravity is known as 1G. What you're experiencing right now, gentlemen, is about 2/3 of a G, which is somewhere towards the middle of the galactic standard gravity range. That's the range of gravity settings that are used in space to be comfortable for most species. Take a moment to move around. Get used to the difference. Jump up and down a bit. Do some push-ups, whatever takes your fancy. Legsy and Adam beamed at one another. Symbrian fell inside the galactic standard range, and they'd guessed that something like this might come up, and had secretly come up with a little stunt. As planned, Legsy stooped, then launched himself off the ground in the highest explosive jump he could manage, achieving his own impressive body height at apex and standing neatly on Adam's raised hands, which the younger man had thrust above his head. Even Cavish seemed taken aback. "I see you two have experience with low gravity." "Yep." Adam shifted his right hand so that he was holding Legsy aloft one-handed, and dropped his left hand casually to his side. Even at 2/3 gravity, he was still holding up a fairly impressive amount of weight, and it was an effort to remain stable and steady. Legsy was wobbling alarmingly and jumped down after a second or two, landing lightly. "Show-offs," Burgess muttered.
"You two got that out of your system, lads?" Powell asked.
"Yes, sir."
"Good. I know you're both used to this, but focus. You might still learn something."
Adam and Legsy both straightened up and nodded their understanding and agreement. "Yes, sir." Cavendish gave them all a few minutes to move around and grow accustomed to the conditions before indicating the rest of the room. The rest of this room is in microgravity, sometimes called 0G. Does anyone here remember Newton's laws of motion? The Deltas, CCTs, Adam, and Powell raised their hands. Cavendish gestured to Adam. "All right, Mr. Showoff, go on then." Adam cursed inwardly, but focused his memory. It had been a few years, and he'd never expected to need them. "The first law defines inertia, stating that an object's velocity will remain unchanged unless it's influenced by a net force," he said. "Nice," Cavendish nodded his congratulations. "The second?" Whenever one object exerts a force upon another, it is in turn subject to a reaction force of equal magnitude with an opposite vector." "That's the third law," Cavendish corrected him. "What's the second?" Adam scowled in thought, but finally had to shake his head. "I can't remember." "Force is equal to..." Adam's memory snapped back into place. "Mass times acceleration." For the rest of you who didn't follow that, and because academic knowledge of something is not the same as intuiting it, here's some practical demonstrations. Cavendish pulled a tennis ball from his pocket and tossed it lightly in his hand a few times. "What goes up comes down. That's because this ball is being acted on by gravity. Catch." He tossed the ball lightly to Murray, who caught it easily, then tossed it back. "The arc the ball describes through the air," Cavendish told them, gently throwing the ball to Blazinski, who threw it to Sykes, starting a slow game of catch that circled the unit, "is called a parabola, and it only describes that arc because it's constantly under the effect of a net force. There's no magnet on the ceiling pulling it up or anything like that. Just gravity pulling it down. Back to me, please." He snatched the ball easily out of the air when Vandenberg threw it to him. "If there's no gravity, however..." He tossed the ball over the edge of the yellow zone. It described a perfect parabola just like before, right up until the moment it crossed the threshold, and was suddenly moving slowly in a perfectly straight line, spinning eerily. They watched it bounce forlornly off the ceiling at the far end of the room. "As Sergeant Ares explained," Cavendish said, peering at Adam's name tag, "the first law means that an object's speed and the direction it's moving in, collectively known as its velocity, remains unchanged unless a force such as gravity acts upon it. The third law is simple enough to not need an explanation. When you push on something, it pushes back. Simple enough, but that's why the whole cartoon thing of going boating by blowing in the sail doesn't work. You're pushing that air forward, and yes, it'll push on the sail. But by blowing, you're also pushing yourself backwards just as strong, and pushing back on the boat through your boots. Follow?" There was a nodding. "Next, a practical demonstration of the second law in action." Cavendish tapped on his tablet computer, and an electric hum that had been pervading the room so subtly that they hadn't noticed it suddenly became obvious by a change in its texture. "You may now enter the green and blue zones. The areas beyond are still microgravity, so don't enter them yet. Be careful, the gravity's even lower over that end." They walked continuously. Sure enough, the gravity halved, then halved again as they passed into the green then blue zones, until they were each standing next to a kettlebell, anticipating what was to come. Now, those are 25-kilogram kettlebells, and we're currently in lunar gravity, 1/6 of that of Earth, Cavendish explained. When I tell you to, I want you to pick them up, slowly and carefully. Don't swing them or anything, just lift and hold them in one hand. Okay? Pick them up. They did so. Adam practically overbalanced. His kettlebell felt like nothing, and to judge from the expression and utterings around him, that was true for everyone. Light, aren't they? Cavendish asked rhetorically. Why don't you swing them around a bit, same way as you would normally? Adam gave his an experimental swing and suddenly understood where Cavendish was going with this. The kettlebell may have been light to lift, but in motion it still put the exact same forces as always through his limbs. More so, actually, he had to fight to hold it down rather than hold it up, as the natural apex of each swing was now much higher. You're now receiving a practical demonstration of the difference between weight and mass, Cavendish told them as they swung. In low gravity, these things have a light weight because there's less gravity pulling on them. But their mass hasn't changed, and the second law of motion means that the force you've got to exert to make that unchanged mass accelerate is the same regardless of whether you're in full Earth gravity, galactic standard, or lunar. Now, Cavendish grinned and rubbed his hands together happily, I notice that every single one of you is struggling with your swing. You're overextending. You're having a hard time holding on. Those weights are going higher than you want. As you will have by now gathered, working in low gravity is remarkably tiring, so stop swinging and listen. He let them stop. Cavendish's rule number 2. Altered gravity is demanding, he announced. Your bodies are evolved to work with gravity to aid them. You are used to pushing against a surface. You are used to having things be pulled down as they come up. Your every instinct is built around the fact that if you are bringing something down from a high place, you let gravity do the work and your muscles are the brakes. In null gravity, that does not apply. In null gravity, if you want to get something down from above your head, you have to drag it down, not support it. And in doing so, you'll also have to drag yourself towards it. Everything you do is an exertion, without exception. He tapped his tablet and gravity went away. The door locked loudly and an alarm hooted through the room. Start swinging again, he ordered. Everyone immediately found themselves being dragged around by their weights. To a man, they parted ways with the ground. Firth actually wound up in a spin, hugging his weight to his chest. All right, you hugging the ball. Push it away from your chest, arm's length, Cavendish told him. He was hanging comfortably only a half-inch or so off the floor and seemed perfectly happy. Firth obeyed, and the spin became much slower. That was a demonstration of angular momentum, Cavendish declared. We'll get to the academic bits of how it works later, but for now understand this. If you're spinning fast, spread yourself out to slow down. If you're spinning slow, make yourself small to speed up. Which brings us to Cavendish's rule number 3. If you are spinning, spread out and slow down. Now everyone, throw your weights away from yourselves. Gently now. They did so. One of the guys, Adam didn't see who, yelped as the weights, upon being thrown away, launched their prior owner in the opposite direction. And there's Newton's third law in action, Cavendish announced. You've just performed rocket propulsion. Throw something out the back, you accelerate yourself. He gave them 20 seconds to tumble and flail in midair, all drifting in random directions across the room at a glacial pace, before finally relenting. Hug your limbs in, protect your face, and go limp, he ordered. I'm about to turn the gravity back on gently. Don't throw your hands out to arrest your fall or anything, just relax and let it happen. Gravity came back, and Adam's slow trajectory to the ceiling became a gentle fall to the earth, a surprisingly high bounce, and then a gentle skid as the gravity ramped up to galactic standard over a few seconds. It didn't hurt at all, but, like all the others, his dignity was a bit battered, especially when he saw that Cavendish had alighted gently on his feet. Cavendish hooked his thumbs into his belt and looked thoroughly pleased with himself. Hopefully, gentlemen, I've now broken any illusions you may have had that extravehicular activity will be easy. How about y'all get up and I start with the actual instruction now? Date point, 6 years, 10 months, 3 weeks, AV. Finchley, London, England, Earth. Sean Harvey. Lazaruk's coming up behind them there. This could be... He sticks 1 Elder Curse. Instant cooldown. Sticks the second. That gets 2. 4 down with Agony. 5. 6. Is he about to? He has. 7 down. Lazaruk just got a TPK as a Godsinger with Thronefall and a Universal Core versus a team using Void Blades and Law of the Jungle. So much for the banner meta. Yeah, that was some old school insta-kill meta, but a lot of skill on show there. Keeping a loss of clarity subdued with Universal Core and 2 ECs, and I don't know how LOC are going to come back from that. They are speaking English, right? Sean, being seated sideways across the chair, flipped a sort of lazy salute to Ava as Charlotte dashed across the room and jumped onto Ben's lap. To everyone's surprise, they turned out to be a good match, and had kept on going beyond their first weekend. Mercifully, they'd also toned down the making out in company. That had earned them a great many thrown objects the first few days. Drinks are in the fridge, he said by way of a hello. Mine's a Desperado. Sweet of you, Ava smacked him playfully on the top of the head as she made a beeline for the kitchen. Sean glanced at Ben and Charlotte to make sure they weren't paying attention, then helped himself to a good look at those tight jeans Ava liked to wear. How did you afford this place anyway? Charlotte asked, wriggling around in Ben's lap to sit upright, interrupting his sightseeing. It's my grand's old place, Sean told her. She left it to me. Dench of her, Ben commented. Yeah, Mum wasn't happy. She wanted to sell it, but it was right there in the will, so... So what the hell are you watching anyway? Ava asked, handing Sean his ass for a beer and sipping down something colorful that had been on offer in bargain booze as she dragged through one of the dining chairs from the kitchen and sat on it. Sean had quickly figured out that Ava's taste in drinks were fairly simple. So long as it was brightly colored and sweet, she liked it. MLG, Mythos Arena Championships. What? Actually, never mind. Ava sipped her drink and watched the screen. Pretty cool. I've got 10 quid on Happy Place Gaming to win the finals, Ben said, squeezing Charlotte around the waist. Nah, 'cause it's DTE versus Vangean in the quarters, and HPG lost 7 of their last 9 games against DTE, Sean declared. It's just a tenner, and I'm betting 7-1, Ben replied. Fair enough, then. You follow esports, Ava? Charlotte asked. No live streams on Symbrian, Ava shrugged. Besides, Papa watched baseball and football. That's what I grew up on. You're like the archetypical country lass, you know that, Sean asked. Me? Sean, how the hell am I a country girl? I was born and raised in San Diego. Everybody looked at one another. That fact hadn't yet come up in conversation. It was hitherto unknown to Sean, and, judging from their expressions, to Charlotte and Ben, too. Sean cleared his throat. You were? Ava's expression was the awkward look of somebody who'd not intended to share that particular information. Yeah. We were on vacation in Florida when, well... Yeah. Ava, Ben began. No sympathy, please, Ava sighed. I've dealt with it, okay? I lost my family and my friends, and the only reason I'm not dead too is because I was on vacation with Adam and his dad, but I'm dealing with it. I don't need sympathy. If you're sure, Sean agreed. How am I a country girl? Just like not having live streams, not knowing about nano tattoos, that sort of thing, Ben told her. Yeah, but Zimbrian's not like... We're not yokels, Ava protested. Yeah, but you know how the country always gets the new things way after the cities do, and the cities have got new things by then. Phone network coverage, broadband, digital radio, that sort of thing. That's what it's like with Symbrian and Earth, Sean told her. No, it's not. Darling, it is like that, Charlotte agreed. Ava stood her ground. We had lots of stuff first, she insisted. Like what? Sean asked. First solar energy force field, first xenobiology lab, first interstellar jump array, first variable gravity gymnasium. Those would all be in the Scotch Creek facility, Ben corrected her. Except for the gym. That was the extraterrestrial environment training facility on Salisbury Plain. Oh, come now. How do you know that? Ava demanded. He's a giant fucking nerd, that's how, Sean grinned at his friend, who just inclined his head in a pleased sort of bow and tipped an imaginary hat, as if Sean had pointed out that he was immaculately dressed. Well, we've got... Ava floundered, then deflated. Small school, small church, walks in the woods, swimming in the lake. Oh, Christ, I am a country girl. There's no need to sound so bloody despondent, Sean told her, as loss of clarity slumped to a decisive defeat on the screen as the players stood, shook hands, and parted ways to make room on stage for the next two teams, saving a round of backslaps and high-fives for Lazarick. Don't forget the flannel shirt and boots, Ben added, earning a playful smack in the upper arm from Charlotte. I can't be a country girl, Ava sulked. I've never even seen a horse. I listen to R&B. And Dean Roscoe, Charlotte added, referring to a chart-topping country musician who even Sean had to admit, as a straight guy, was thoroughly fuckable. I thought you were taking her side, Ben complained. What kind of R&B? Sean asked, sparing Ava's discomfort. Huh? Oh, Santos, Lilia Perez, Manny B. Sean shrugged, not recognizing any of them. Maybe not such a country girl after all, then, Ben commented, nodding. What about you? Ava asked him. I like anything, Ben said. But I guess metal's my favorite. Soldiers and Queens, Buying Time, Bring Me the Horizon, Granuloma. Sean nodded vigorously before Ava could ask him, so they all looked expectantly to Charlotte, who smiled sheepishly. I like all the stuff my grandma was listening to, she confessed. The Beatles, and the Beach Boys, and the Who, and... Anybody whose name started with the, Ben teased, and smiled at another playful slap on the arm. Dean Roscoe, though. Ava looked defiant. He's hot! Thought you only had eyes for this Adam of yours, Ben teased her. Oh, come on, everyone's allowed to think a celebrity's hot. Actually, what's he look like? Charlotte asked. Dean Roscoe? Adam. Ava frowned at her. I've shown you, haven't I? Charlotte just shook her head, as did the guys when Ava looked to them, so she dug into her pocket and pulled out her phone, a slightly old touchscreen one, and swiped through her photo gallery. Here, she handed the phone to Charlotte. I took this at Christmas. Charlotte studied it, doing her boy candy face again. Oh. Hey! Ben and Ava objected simultaneously, prompting her to hand the phone to Sean with an apologetic smile for Ava and a kiss for Ben. Sean examined the photo. A selfie. Adam was shorter than Ava, but big. As broad as two Seans across his shoulders, and it took Sean a second to realize that he was actually holding Ava in his arms with the same easy strength that Sean himself might have lifted a large book, smiling warmly. He looks like a nice guy, he conceded. He also looked handsome in a military-fit, stubble-headed kind of way. Yeah. Ava took the phone back and stared at the picture for a second, then a second longer. Sean was about to get her attention when she blinked and put the phone away. You okay? He asked. Yeah. She nodded a little too vigorously, only barely getting the word out. Sean glanced at Ben, who delivered the most subtle headshake, and so the matter was dropped. Instead, Sean just extended his bottle and Ava tapped her own off it. And we're off. Looks like the GOC and the Splitting Hairs are ignoring what happened in the previous round because they're both still going with a banner build system. Looks like plenty of angels out there on the field and GOC take an early rush on Bravo. Date point. 6 years, 10 months, 3 weeks, 1 day. AV. Huntsville, Alabama. Adam Aries. Drew Cavendish actually accompanied the SOR and PT the next morning. Obviously, he couldn't perform at anything near their standard, but he took part and did surprisingly well for a civilian engineer. Then again, as he had aptly demonstrated in Zero-G training, Operating a spacesuit required fitness, and he was an experienced spacewalker. They were all motivated and alert, therefore, when they were shown into a lecture theater and sat down in the front row. "I'm told there's a grand military tradition called death by PowerPoint," Cavendish said once they were all settled. "Fortunately, we've got something better here." He played with the computer for a second, and a life-size spacesuit materialized next to him, forming like a ghost in midair, and then flickering into apparently solid reality, spinning slowly on the spot. "You know, most of the idiots at this school still just use holographic projector for PowerPoint slides," Cavendish joked. "Looks bloody silly to me when they do that." There were some chuckles, but everyone was looking at the suit. "Anyways, this is Extravehicular Military Activity Spacesuit, EV-MASS." Adam studied it. It looked like a comparatively ordinary modern suit of body armor, borrowing elements from several different armor systems. Really, nobody wearing one would have stood out amongst the lineup of soldiers in combat gear, except for the mask that covered the nose and mouth, and the sturdy metal ring around the jawbone and base of the skull that was the dock where the mask and helmet were joined to the rest of the suit. EV-MASS is designed with the mission profile of allowing you to deploy and fight in zero-G and vacuum, as well as on space stations, starships, and on the ground, and to be able to translate from one to the other without vehicles if need be. Originally, we toyed with the idea of including a power-assisted exoskeleton, but, well, that one's still science fiction for now. This suit is moved exclusively by its operator, which is why you gentlemen need to be so strong. There is no such thing as a light spacesuit." He clicked something and the holographic suit became 3 suits, standing shoulder to shoulder. "The system comprises of 3 suit components, under, outer, and mid," Cavendish said. He stepped over to and grabbed one of them, physically turning it around as if it were a real object, and leaving Adam thoroughly impressed by just how far holographic technology had come in a short space of time. "The outer suit consists of your camouflage, load-carrying equipment, and the rigid structures of your helmet, forearms, shins, and thighs, which were designed to receive mission-specific modules and equipment. It also includes the control panel mounted on the inside of your left wrist." He raised the holographic suit's arm to demonstrate, though the modular system allows that to be worn on the right arm instead, for left-handers. "It also includes the environmental systems," he indicated a football-sized pack mounted on the suit's pelvis, "the heat exchanger and force field emitter, both of which were mounted horizontally on the shoulders, capacitor bank, which ran down the spine, and kinetic thrusters and gyroscopes." He indicated surprisingly small protuberances at the shoulders and waist. "Any questions about the outer suit before I move on?" Sykes raised a hand. "Sir, is this helmet considered part of the outer suit?" "No, the helmet and breathing mask form part of the mid-suit. What you're seeing here is the digital camo skin of the helmet," Cavendish answered. Baseball asked a question. "Sir, gyroscopes?" "You remember Firth's demonstration of angular momentum yesterday? Well, gyroscopes exploit that same phenomenon to keep you stable in space. They're spinning weights controlled by an optical tracking system mounted on your helmet that tracks visible features around you, the walls, the floors, or distant stars, whatever. Figures out your movement and stabilizes it. So long as the gyroscopes are powered, it's literally impossible to throw yourself into an uncontrolled tumble or spin." He gave a second for any further questions, then moved on. "The mid-suit. This is the actual pressure suit and armor, built in several layers. The outermost is Kevlar aramid fabric, offering first-layer defense against bullets and micrometeorites." The hologram's outer skin vanished, revealing a dull, silvery fish-scale layer. "Below this is the scale leather, which is your most serious protection. It is a layer of metalloceramic composite fine scales, designed to resist penetration and to distribute impacts across a wider area. Below that, padding and impact gel, for further protection and to help with the weight of the scale layer. Below that are the insulation, pressure, and environmental layers, all of which keep you from being exposed to vacuum. And finally, the heat-activated memory gel that conforms to your body and contours for compression." He tapped something the size of a smartphone installed under the helmet's hard armor layer on the back of the head. "The CPU for all of the suit's active components is housed here, below the armor, on the basis that a penetrating hit to either CPU or the skull is going to kill you anyways, so we may as well put them both in the same place. And in the event that the CPU hit wouldn't kill you, then the extra protection it offers just might save your life. He looked around at them. They were all giving him their full attention. Again, any questions about the midsuit?
Firth raised his hand. Sir, how much protection does this thing offer?
Its SAPI rating is somewhere upwards of level 4, Cavendish told them. The mechanism for that being that those scales are small, and they deform rather than shatter. The impact is conveyed to the padding in the gel layer underneath that's hugging you so tightly. In destructive testing, the midsuit withstands sustained rapid-fire 7.62 at point blank without breaching. We emptied an AK into the bloody thing, and the worst an operator would have suffered was some bruising.
Nobody actually spoke, but the impressed changes to their body language made a gentle surroundings around the room.
And against non-human weaponry?
Powell asked.
Effectively invulnerable to kinetic pulse and electrical discharge weapons, Cavendish told him. There's no known protection against nerve jam, and coil guns and plasma weapons are classified as heavy weapons, which the suit's not rated for anyways.
He waited. No further hands went up, so he turned to the final holographic mannequin.
Finally, and most importantly, the undersuit, he said. Without this, the whole system would not be viable.
The undersuit looked like something that Superman might wear. It was skin-tight and covered in an arterial network of wide, flat structures that echoed the load-bearing mechanical lines of the human body. Aside from a zipper up the thoracic vertebrae and a pair of inlet-outlet ports just below the kidneys, it was otherwise featureless.
This thing performs 5 hugely important roles for you, the first of which is orthopedic pressure. That suit hugs you better than skin tight, keeping your muscles and joints compressed and supported, reducing the risk of strain and injury while using EV mass. Second, it whips sweat away from the skin and into those transparent structures you see all over it. Now this is where it gets clever. Those structures are made from a polymer invented for us by the Corti according to our specifications. It's flexible and squishy, but only in certain ways and up to a point. It's dynamically compressible, in other words, and it's watertight. The practical upshot of this is that A, it further helps you support and distribute heavy loads and mechanically assist your legs and back, and B, transports water, pumping it with the motion of your own body. That water serves 3 roles. 1, it's part of the support structure too, because it's incompressible. 2, it passes through the heat exchanger and is refrigerated before returning to the conduits around your body, nice and cold. So it transports heat away from your body. Third, pumping it passes it through filters. It comes out the other side completely potable and is connected to a sippy straw in your breathing mask. In other words, you will always have cool water on tap while you're wearing this thing. The mask can load cartridges of electrolyte powder, sports drink mix, whatever. He paused and with a few clicks of the mouse recombined the 3 subsuits into one unit. One thing you lads are going to have to learn, and learn well, is resource management, he said, coming out from behind the lectern. Your own body heat is an environmental hazard. You're going to sweat out all of your salts and electrolytes while using this thing, and every sports scientist in our design team all agreed there is no way to do anything at all in this suit and break even for calories. But, he added, they also all agree that it is possible to move and be effective in this suit. Thanks to the therapy you're already receiving, you'll get there rather quickly. But by the time you're fully up to standard to use this suit in the field, you're going to be large enough that those concerns about body heat will apply even outside of the suit, at least while at very strenuous activity. Fortunately, the suit solves that. Without the suit, you will overheat and fail quickly. Without you, the suit is just an inert lump of technology. The 2 of you together can accomplish things the likes of which nothing else in the galaxy can even conceive, and I look forward to training you in its use and operation. He rubbed his hands. That concludes the introduction. Any questions before I start breaking it down component by component? Date point,
6 years, 11 months AV. Folktha, Cimbrian. The Far Reaches. Moses Byron.
Oh, Mr. Byron, we are all so pleased to hear you are coming. The project's really starting to find its feet.
So I heard, Moses replied. The VP in charge of Cimbrian development, Levon Thomas, was one of the more interesting people that he employed, being both a rare example of somebody who had managed to remain overweight while living on Cimbrian with its mandatory exercise schedule, and as camp as a Hollywood manicurist. He was also so much of a brown-noser that it was a wonder he could smell his own Paco Rabanne, but Byron didn't mind that when it came attached to a keen organizational mind. You're all doing a good job out here, he commented, glad that he'd sent one of his 3 AW609 tilt rotors out there. The vehicle was surprisingly quiet on the inside, easy enough to have a conversation in. 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Well done.
Yes, sir, Thomas beamed happily, cleaning his spectacles. Everyone's so rising to the occasion.
Byron reflected that sparing no expense had probably helped there if he was any judge. The project's wastage was going to border on the scandalously high without being high enough to warrant a stern response. Hopefully. Still, it would prove to be worth it in the end. Cimbrian definitely would profit, and probably sooner rather than later. But even if he never got to enjoy those profits himself, he'd go down in history as the ultimate philanthropist. A win-win. He looked out of the tilt rotor's window as the pilot pushed it into the horizontal flight mode and circled around Folktha's western districts, where the bulk of his construction work was happening. The huge agricultural depots were already in place, the workshops and factories, and dozens of small grain silos. Yes, a handful of immense ones would have been more cost-effective for bulk storage, but the engineers had produced some rather neat graphs to show that the energy costs of jumping that much volume back to Earth through the array technology would have caused the original planned huge silos to fill faster than they could have been emptied. Sending little and often, on the other hand, kept on top of predicted growth for nearly 10 years before an expansion became necessary. Little surprises like that had kept the project truly interesting, but as they picked up speed and set course for the real crown jewel of his plans, 50 miles out of town, he found his attention drawn upwards. When do they arrive? He asked.
They're already into orbit, Mr. Byron. Their shuttle should be landing about the same time as we do.
Byron looked back down, satisfied. That's native flora down there, isn't it? He asked. The Cimbrian native plants were chlorophyll-based, just like on Earth, but they had a slightly paler, bluish cast to them. Earthling flora was evolved for an atmosphere which was nowhere near as effective at blocking out UV, and was darker as a result. You could really tell the difference.
Yes, sir.
I only really start to appreciate just how big it is when I see it from up here. A whole planet, Levon. All of its native life, doomed. All of it now becoming humanity's property. All because somebody got caught short in the woods.
I know. It's terrifying,
Thomas nodded. Awful, Byron said, as if agreeing. He chose the word extremely carefully. The thought really did leave him full of awe. If a lone and ignorant human could do something so momentous accidentally. Byron's mental filing system had, for most of his life, included a folder he had thought of as moon laser projects. Ideas that were simultaneously both technologically possible, as in the math checked out and there was no real obstacle to making it happen, but obviously absurd. He could have afforded to establish a permanent manned installation on the moon equipped with a giant laser. Sure, the idea had been to use it for laser propulsion of interstellar probes equipped with solar sails rather than some idiot James Bond villain-like thing blowing up the New York Stock Exchange, but why? It wasn't like they'd come back, and when probes like New Horizons and Voyager had done just fine with old-fashioned reaction mass and gravity boosts, nobody needed a laser on the moon. What they needed was civil engineering projects, small business investments, energy, or, hell, maybe just a cooler fridge, a smarter phone, and a carbon-neutral car. They needed an ethical mogul, a world-class multi-billionaire who used his money responsible and for the betterment of the common man. Moses knew that he was not that man. He just did a very convincing impression of that man. Hence the moon laser folder. It was where he stuffed all the amazing things that a little boy had once imagined that billionaires did. After all, Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne were billionaires. Lex Luthor, too, even if he was the baddie. And that little boy was still very much alive in there, and adamant that at least one of those things would get done. 50 years on, the little boy knew that you didn't just build a laser on the moon. First, you laid the groundwork. You got the logistics in place, prepared a plan, got everything as ready as it could be. Then you made the world need a laser on the moon, and they'd pay for it for you. Mr. Byron? Moses shook off his thoughtful fugue. Oh, I'm sorry, Levon. That was rude of me. It's nothing important, sir. I was just saying that the shuttle's alongside us. Moses glanced out the port window. Sure enough, a gray vehicle with all the aerodynamic grace and aesthetic beauty of a breeze block was keeping pace with them and held aloft by force fields and kinetic thrusters. It was a fair bit larger than the tilt rotor and a damn sight uglier. Looks like we got us a convoy, he drawled and stood up to cross the cabin for a better view. This did little to improve the shuttle's appearance, and he couldn't see the pilot through the black canopy, so after a moment or two he returned to his seat and looked back out the window. Sure, the agricultural facilities back in Folktham might be more furnished, as was the spaceport, but it was this facility that held his real hope for Cimbrian's future. It was a compound, 3 overlapping rectangles on the ground, one of which was already the drained abscess wound that would form the basement and foundation for the regional office building. Regional meant the whole planet for the foreseeable future. It wasn't pretty, but he'd seen the architectural plans. It would be, especially once the ornamental monoliths, foundations, reflecting pools, lawns, and trees were in place. The important building, however, was very much finished. They sat down some 5 minutes after the compound and its hive of busy yellow vehicles came into view, the shuttle politely allowing Byron's tilt rotor to alight first, tucking its engine nacelles up into the vertical and spinning them down like a crow settling its plumage. True to form, the shuttle's own landing was graceless. It wallowed down onto a force field cushion and thumped up a cloud of dust as it cut power to the engines and relied on the fields to handle the last few inches. If not for the stabilizers inside it, it would have been a rough jolt of a landing. Moses adjusted the cuffs of his shirt and jacket as he crossed the grass. The aliens had been quite clear that they didn't plan on staying a moment longer than was necessary to make the delivery. They were Governor Ag, as big as backhoes themselves, but still able to stand side by side in the cavernous shuttle, carrying something between them. Huge, dark brown, shaggy, and rippling with color, along with the bioluminescent lines that began in the middle of their huge foreheads and spread down their spines and flanks. They rolled down the shaking ramp on sturdy, elephantine legs, each with one thick-fingered hand hefting the handle of a crate as big as their torsos. Gentle beings, welcome. Byron spread his hands in hospitality, reminding himself to keep the smile on his face close-mouthed. Bared teeth grins unnerved and frightened aliens as a rule. He hoped that the translator that Thomas was carrying was up to the job, but it seemed that it was, as it chugged out at length a string of syllables that sounded something like a long-winded Japanese being spoken by a double bass. The slightly smaller of the two aliens replied in kind, and Byron blinked as the translator canceled out his words with phase shift noise and replaced them with a startlingly high-pitched piccolo woman's voice. The translators allegedly tried to find an equivalent match for vocal pitch and mannerisms, suggesting that this particular Governor Egg was a young and ebullient female. "Mr. Moses Byron," she exclaimed, and glanced at her bodyguard, patterns of light pulsing all over her skin. Moses searched his recent memory, having studied Governor Egg bioluminescence in depth just that morning. The young female was nervous, intimidated, or perhaps just inexperienced and jittery. It was hard to tell. "It is good to meet you at last." "The beginning of what I hope will be a profitable relationship for us both," Moses declared, extending a hand. After a moment's hesitation, the Governor Egg trader extended her own hand, which was a good triple the size of Moses' own, and shook hands. He made a point of not gripping anything. Her immense mitt may have been warm and soft, but the bones inside it weren't a patch on the human skeleton, and it would not do to injure a trading partner.
"Speaking of which,"
the other governor grumbled, being given a deep, phlegmatic voice. Of course. Levon? Thomas nodded and waved 2 men forward, each dragging a wheeled suitcase. Original human artwork, Moses said, as the first one was opened. 10 paintings, 3 sculptures, unique and, thanks to your Confederacy's quarantine field, otherwise almost impossible to export, he smiled. I suspect that this case alone will pay for our purchase in full, if you find the right auctioneers. As to the other case, it opened, revealing a neat rack of little glass phials and little plastic boxes. Terran organic compounds, medicines mostly, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, aspirin, codeine. There are also samples of caffeine, tea tree oil, mint oil, pimento berry oil, olive oil, xanthan gum, cumin, black pepper, cocoa, latex. A full list is in there, along with instructions of what they can do, a comprehensive assessment of which ones may prove to be hazardous, and the formula for some of the simpler ones. Oh, and please accept this with my compliments. He offered the bottle that Thomas had just handed him. A personal gift. California's Cabernet Sauvignon, 2007. The last really good vintage year before the long drought, and I'm assured entirely safe for Governor Ag biology. He suspected, from the hues that pulsed down their lengths, that the aliens were taken aback. Such generosity, the female exclaimed. Moses smiled benevolently. You'll find a spiral device amid the artwork, he said. It's not an abstract sculpture. It's called a corkscrew, and you'll need it to get the bottle open. You'll figure out how, I'm sure. Thank you, and, well, here is our end of the trade. They picked up the object they had been carrying between them, set it down again in front of them, opened it, and took out its contents, which they set atop the carrying case. Oh my God, Moses breathed and leaned in, pleasantly surprised. It even looks the part.
Excuse me? The male alien asked.
I'm sick of technology like warp drives and gravity field generators and whatever, looking like something out of a ham radio catalog. Moses indicated the object he had just purchased. It looked great. Enigmatic, black, festooned with alien runes and pulsing lines of light. Look at this thing. This is what I always imagined a sci-fi gizmo like an FTL comms relay would look like. The Governor Ag traders exchanged glances, and then, sheepishly, the male stepped forward and opened what turned out to be the box that the actual FTL comms relay came in. Moses deflated. The object inside was plain old technology after all, wrapped in static-free plastic and a cradle of packing foam. It was drab, metallic, and functional. All bare screw heads, electrical connectors, and data ports, and the 3 alien runes were probably warnings, warranty void stickers, and the serial number. Figures, he sighed. Why the flashy lines? Those are emotional indicators. They tell Governor Ag that the object inside is delicate and should be handled carefully, the female explained. They're emoticons, Thomas translated. Thank you, Levon. Moses only barely stopped himself from sounding nettled and forced himself back into a good mood. It was stupid to be so disappointed by something so trivial when he now had a brand new interstellar communications device to play with. Or, more accurately, to pay people to play with. He straightened. Well, thank you very much indeed. I do hope you found our business satisfactory. We did, the female enthused, echoed by an assenting rumble from her counterpart. If you need any help getting that stuff onto the shuttle. The aliens tested the suitcases, assured him that everything was fine, and retreated up the ramp, wishing him fond farewells and prompting to try the wine their first opportunity. Levon had already handed the relay off to the technicians and engineers who were bustling it towards the communications building as fast as they could without jolting it. That seemed to go smoothly, he observed, bringing his exquisitely plucked eyebrows together in a frown. You're not a believer in smooth business transactions, Levon? Moses asked him wryly.
So not, Levon retorted, rolling his eyes. Daddy always told me there's always a catch.
Moses chuckled, looked up at the shuttle as it lurched into the air and away. Why introduce a catch when it's not needed? All that stuff cost me, what, a few $100s? My investment portfolio made that much just standing here. And in return,
we can talk to the galaxy.
Byron smiled. For starters, Levon, he agreed. For starters. Date point. 6 years, 11 months, 2 weeks AV. Folktha, Cimbrian, the far reaches. Eden had been sold, of course. There was always a demand for housing in Folktha these days. It was a boom town in a huge way, being equal parts scientific goldmine, private sector wet dream, and a retirement paradise where the gravity weighed just a little less on wealthy old bones. Thousands of idealistic libertarian dreamers had flocked in, and Sir Jeremy Sandy had taken a convincing win in Cimbrian's first ever democratic elections to remain as colonial governor, thanks in part to his adoption of the most progressive, fair-handed, and logical social policies that modern political theory could invent. Businesses had flooded in alongside the people, investing billions. Folktha's skyline was all cranes and scaffolding as buildings popped up like mushrooms, each one outdoing its predecessors as the architects fought for prestige and to make the most creative use of the opportunities afforded by low gravity. The forest line had been pushed back for miles, and the farmers seemed to be making more money just buying up land than selling it for development so that they could buy more land further out than from the actual agriculture. Hotel space was also cheap, and much nicer than Eden had been. Besides, it wasn't like Adam had many opportunities to spend his salary on much else. Most of it went straight into his savings. Dipping into those savings to spend Christmas and the New Year at the brand new Folktha Star Hotel had been his idea, and a genius one. The walls were thick and soundproofed, the bed was measured in acres, and the bath was big enough for two, and the windows were thick, sturdy, and completely opaque from the outside, in part thanks to the solar gathering force field that meant the hotel was a net contributor to the city's power grid. All of those should have been gratefully, enthusiastically, and repeatedly exploited to their maximum erotic potential. Instead, they had sex, oh yes, powerful, athletic, gasping sex. Legs wrapped around him so hard that her knees creaked sex. Fingernails down his back drawing blood sex. The cold glass of that huge, sturdy floor-to-ceiling window against her back and buttocks sex, made all the better by the scandalous illusion of exhibitionism. That had all been one ride, a mind-blowing reunion fuck that had promised more and even better to follow, but failed to deliver. Adam was busy. How the hell could somebody keep so busy on their Christmas break was beyond her, but he got up at 4 in the goddamn morning, span through the shower, then vanished to the gym, returning around sunset aching and exhausting and full of willing spirit but empty of actual energy. Naturally, she'd complained. He'd explained that he had to keep his training regime up, that every gram of muscle mass was a target that he had to hit. When she'd suggested dinner, he'd pointed out that his every calorie and vitamin was tightly controlled. And he was so stealthy, there was no hope of waking up to at least get a few minutes with him in the dark of the early morning, because he'd slip out of bed like a dream, shower like rain on the window, and when he slipped out of the room, the door closed behind him with a click that was quieter than the wall's clock ticking. When he came back, she could snuggle up to him all she liked. She'd get kissed, maybe some happy nose nuzzles, and all of that good stuff, for the few minutes until he fell asleep, completely drained by his regimen. All things considered, spending her lover's birthday alone at noon in a dry dock-sized bathtub and treating herself to a mojito jug intended for two wasn't how she'd envisioned their time together going. And she'd had 2 weeks of this to look forward to. Fuck that. She abandoned the drink, threw on clean clothes, and buckled on her camera with the fierceness of a rancher gal of the Old West fixing to fight off bandits. There were photo opportunities going begging all over this town, material to fill her website for a year. She'd sell her photos to agencies, news organizations, and private buyers. A camera in the right hands could be a money engine. If she wasn't going to get laid, she may as well at least get paid. She could sort out Adam later. Hopefully. A productive afternoon and evening showed Folkta at its best. The sterile filth and colorful grayness of the building sites, the way that Cimbrian's star, still unnamed, just had that slight bit more magenta in it than a Sol sunset as it painted the first extraterrestrial human city. How Folkta at night was both the same as and different to any other city, with all the hue and splendor of its nightlife playing out under the 3 tuberous irregular moons. She had almost forgotten about Adam by the time she got back. There was no ignoring him when she tugged her key card in the room lock, though. He was asleep with the blanket draped over one leg and everything else naked to the night air. A study in masculine geometry, and as fast asleep as King Arthur under the mountain. All of her frustration with him came right back, and the devilish idea for waking him up that had just occurred to her was drowned out by the much louder voice of irritation. There was nothing for it but to sigh, strip, and climb into bed next to him, wondering what the hell she was going to do. A fitful night's sleep full of that question was answered when, to her astonishment, she rolled over in the morning to find that it was full daylight outside and that he was still there, dozing on his side facing her with a half-lidded, sleepy and loving expression. "Hey," he barely whispered. "Hey," she replied, as 2 distant parts of her brain embroiled themselves in a tug-of-war over whether to voice her discontent now or wait until she had screwed him senseless, then voice her discontent. He kissed her, ending that argument. He was so strong. She could feel it even though his touch was light, and they didn't need long before she was straddling his hips, grinding and gasping and eagerly working towards the moment when she'd be ready to get around to him properly. "Oh, God. So, what's so special about today?" He was too busy sucking on her nipple to reply properly, so just made an inquisitive noise. "You didn't sneak out this morning." He chuckled and kissed the hollow where her throat met her collarbone, dropping his hands to her hips. "It's my rest day." Ava blinked and stopped moving. "Your rest day?" Adam frowned, confusing. "Yeah, weekends are rest days." "You..." Her mood evaporated, and she scooted down his thighs a bit, sitting on his knees. "You scheduled this?" Adam's expression had gone from confident lover to confused boyfriend to kicked puppy in a matter of seconds. "Well, not like this, but like the day..." "Jeez!" she seethed and surged to her feet. "Well, I'm glad you could fit me into your busy goddamn schedule." "Ava!" The exclamation was a hurt and confused one. "No, seriously, what's your thought process here?" she demanded. "Let's hear it." "Well, look, Ava, baby, I need to keep this up. Like, it could be dangerous for me to not keep my exercise going while I'm here. Even if it's not, it could undo a lot of hard work." "And what the hell am I supposed to do when you're gone all day?" "I figured, it's a nice hotel. There's a spa. There's, like..." She interrupted him, practically spitting lightning bolts. "No he venido aquí para mirar el paisaje, parita." Adam's jaw went slack. "What did you just..." "I called you a little bitch, you fucking idiot," she snarled. "Or did all that exercise squeeze the Spanish out of your brain?" There was a long moment of silence, chilly on her part, hurt and confused on his. He stood up about the same time as she sat down and started to get dressed. His boots were laced, and he all but had his hand on the door handle when she spoke to him. "Adam, I'm sorry." He paused and looked back at her. Her ankles were crossed, her hands were hugged at her waist, and she couldn't hold his gaze. She looked away almost instantly, shaking and chewing her lip. "Will, let me just..." he began, then started over. "We both need to... We'll talk when I get back." "Don't be long, please," she begged him. In the end, he was barely gone for half an hour, and returned with little more than a glow of sweat to show for the run he must have gone on. She dressed, but then sat down on the bed again and pulled the blanket around her shoulders, waiting. She summoned a weak smile for him. Hey. God, Ava, I'm sorry. He sat down next to her and engulfed her shoulders in his right arm, skin like a furnace against hers. You're right. I didn't have a thought process there. I didn't think about you at all, did I? She rubbed her eyes and nuzzled into him. I love you, she said, but you can't just... I'm not a video game, Adam. You can't just load me up and carry on from where you left off, you know? It's been a year, Adam, and then you come back and pencil me in for the weekends. I know, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have called you that, but, she sighed. Look, can we just put it behind us and salvage the second week of this break? Just you and me, every day, all day, until you have to go back. He hesitated and her heart sank. Baby, I wish I could promise that, he said, but I wasn't kidding about it being maybe dangerous. Fine, she declared. Fine, what can you promise? What would you like? What I'd like is... She stopped herself and moderated herself. Look, just wake me up before you head out. Talk to me. Involve me. Get back here as early as you can and spend time with me. Hell, you're fresh in the morning. Get some of that exercise right here in this bed. And if you have to control what you eat, can we at least eat together? I can do all of that, he said. Good. So, where were we before? Forget about it, cabron, she told him. You killed that mood stone dead. You've got a lot of cuddling to do before we get back there again. After a silent second, he got the hint and finally put his arms around her and muzzled up close. After a while, it even started to feel natural and safe again. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I'm the Casual Deathworlder, your host, and this has been the conclusion of The Deathworlders, Chapter 22, The Second Year. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and smash those like and subscribe buttons down below, and consider dropping us a comment. As always, a huge shout out to my buddy Gregor. Thank you very much, buddy. I could not do this without you. And my heartfelt apologies for the absolute mangled mess that I've just handed you to edit. And an apology to everybody else who is or speaks Spanish for my butchery of the language. Yeah, I speak two languages, English and bad English. And before we go any further, a shout out to my Tier 4 Patreon patrons, Neo5AC, Russ of the Frozen North, and Nick. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, I have figured out what's going to go into the mid-week slot, at least for a little while. I'm going to begin recording on hang on, what is that story called? Oh yes, Deathworld Origins. It's an 8-part story about the war between the Agrayans, who ultimately come to be known as the Hunters, also the Hierarchy, and the Vestrak, the first sapient species to inhabit the Earth some 65 million years ago, and how that all turned out. Okay. And whether or not I continue with Time and Tide, I guess all depends on how that all goes. Okay. In the meantime, question, who's got the question? Okay. What do you think of AI? And I don't mean the crappy little art programs that, give people like 12 fingers on each hand, which are absolute garbage, but unfortunately, people like me need them, who need art quite frequently. But I'm talking, actual AI like ChatGPT, programs that are, designed to, actually be an intelligence or at least emulate one. What are your thoughts? Are we in danger? Could it save mankind? Make life better? Make life worse? What do you think? Leave your answers in the comments down below. In the meantime, be safe, be well. I love you all. Bye-bye.